The world has always been fascinated by the drama that unfolds within the royal family, but rarely has there been a moment so raw, so unfiltered, and so emotionally charged that millions stopped everything just to watch. It wasn't an official state event, it wasn't a coronation, and it wasn't even a staged interview. This was something no one had seen coming. Meghan Markle, live and unscripted, issuing an apology to the woman destined to be Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, Catherine, the Princess of Wales. And as that apology poured out before cameras, the global audience held its breath. Yet what no one expected was the thunderous rejection that came not from Catherine, but from Prince William, who stood firm in his refusal to accept it. The apology that could have been a bridge turned into a bombshell that shook the monarchy's fragile foundation all over again. Why did it matter so much? Because apologies within the royal family are rare. This isn't Hollywood or reality television where public feuds are settled with sit-downs and red carpet reconciliations. The monarchy thrives on image, stability, and stoicism. Every gesture is calculated, every word rehearsed. Yet here was Meghan, standing before the world, cracking open a door that the palace had worked tirelessly to keep sealed. She admitted, in her own words, that she had wronged the future queen consort, that she wanted forgiveness, that she was willing to be humbled. To some, it was a breathtaking act of courage. To others, it was the most desperate attempt yet at salvaging a reputation battered by years of controversy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But the apology was only the first chapter in a far larger story. Because the world quickly realized that while Catherine's silence spoke volumes, William's voice cut deeper than any headline could. He refused to accept Meghan's words. He refused to let the moment pass into history as a gesture of reconciliation. Instead, he stood before cameras and drew a line so sharp that even those who had supported Meghan began to wonder if perhaps this feud was not about tabloids or misunderstandings, but about something far more personal, far more irreversible. That public rejection, delivered with the weight of a future king, sent shockwaves through royal watchers, the British public, and Meghan herself, whose face betrayed the heartbreak of someone who thought she might finally be let back in, only to be told she never would. To understand why this moment was so explosive, we have to rewind. Meghan and Catherine's strained relationship has been the subject of speculation since the early days of Meghan's marriage to Prince Harry. At first, the world imagined a fairy tale sisterhood, two glamorous young women, united by their royal titles, carrying the monarchy into a new era together. But almost immediately, cracks appeared. The infamous bridesmaid dress incident during Meghan's wedding preparations left scars that would never heal. British tabloids claimed Catherine had been reduced to tears by Meghan. Meghan, years later, claimed the opposite in her Oprah interview, saying it was she who had cried. The truth may never be fully known, but what mattered was the fallout. For Catherine, the story painted her as vulnerable and hurt. For Meghan, it was a narrative that branded her difficult and unkind. And from that point onward, the press pitted the two women against each other relentlessly. Layered on top of this was the broader tension between Harry and his brother William. Once inseparable, their bond frayed under the pressures of royal duty and Meghan's arrival. Harry felt his wife was mistreated by both the institution and the press, while William and Catherine seemed to embody the very system Meghan and Harry rejected. That divide became public, brutal, and seemingly permanent after the Oprah interview, in which Meghan made damaging claims about palace life, the royal family's attitudes, and even private conversations about her children. For Catherine, who had built her entire life on composure and silence, this was not just an attack on the institution. It was personal. Her name, her actions, her motherhood were suddenly subjects of global debate, and she had no platform to respond. Meghan's voice dominated the headlines, while Catherine was left to absorb the blows in silence. Fast forward to this apology. Imagine the weight behind Meghan's words as she acknowledged her past mistakes in front of millions. For once, she was not casting blame, not redirecting attention, not speaking as the rebel duchess, but as a woman who claimed she wanted to make peace. And the room, the audience, the world, everyone leaned in. Could this be the moment when the years of animosity finally dissolved? Could this be the olive branch Catherine had quietly waited for? The chance for the royal brothers to mend? The opportunity for the monarchy to heal from the gashes left by scandal after scandal? For a fleeting moment, the hope felt real. But then came the silence. Catherine did not rush forward with tears in her eyes. She did not embrace Meghan. She did not deliver the fairy tale moment of two women putting aside their differences for the good of the family. Instead, she remained composed, measured, dignified, her face betraying nothing of what she felt inside. And that was when William stepped in. His words, blunt and unyielding, were a shield around his wife. He made it clear, in no uncertain terms, that forgiveness was not something to be granted so easily. That Meghan's apology, whether heartfelt or strategic, did not erase the years of pain, the public wounds, the strain inflicted on his family. The rejection was not only of Meghan's words, but of the idea that reconciliation could be achieved with a single gesture. The audience erupted. Social media platforms exploded with commentary. Hashtags trended within minutes, some praising Meghan for her courage, others applauding William for his loyalty to Catherine. The world became a courtroom of public opinion, with Meghan's sincerity put on trial and William's anger scrutinized. Was Meghan finally showing humility, or was she playing to the cameras once again? Was William being protective, or was he perpetuating the same coldness Meghan had accused the family of? These were not just questions about individuals. They were questions about forgiveness, power, and the future of a monarchy struggling to survive in a modern world where every misstep is magnified. What made this moment so captivating was the human drama at its core. Strip away the crowns, the titles, the centuries of tradition, and what you had was a family feud magnified to a global scale. A sister-in-law who had hurt another, standing before her, saying sorry. A husband unwilling to let the wound heal, determined to guard his wife's honor. A brother caught in the middle, torn between the woman he loves and the family he was born into. And an audience of millions, watching in real time, projecting their own feelings of betrayal, forgiveness, pride, and heartbreak onto a story that was, in many ways, painfully relatable. Because who among us hasn't struggled with apologies that came too late, wounds that never healed, or family divisions that refused to be bridged? The introduction to this story, then, is not just about Meghan's apology or William's rejection. It is about the emotional storm that erupted when private pain became public theater. It is about the question of whether reconciliation is ever truly possible when so much trust has been broken. And it is about the monarchy's precarious place in a world that craves both authenticity and spectacle. As the cameras stopped rolling that day, the audience was left with more questions than answers. Would Catherine ever speak on her own feelings? Would William's rejection become the final word, or would time soften his stance? And what did Meghan's apology really mean? For her, for Harry, for the monarchy, and for all of us who watched with hearts racing. This is the stage upon which the story unfolds. A live apology, a public rejection, and the ripple effects that neither Meghan nor William could control. And as we begin this journey into the details, the background, the reactions, the fallout, we must ask ourselves, was this the beginning of the end, or the painful first step towards something resembling healing? That is the question that will carry us through. The room was charged with a kind of tension that could be felt even through the television screen. Journalists who had covered royal events for decades admitted they had never seen anything like it. The cameras panned in on Meghan Markle, who was visibly nervous but composed, her voice wavering slightly as she began. She had chosen her words carefully, but what made the moment so startling was not the script, but the vulnerability in her tone. Meghan spoke directly to Catherine, not in the detached, polished language of a press release, but in the raw manner of someone confronting another human being after years of distance. It was not a statement issued through a spokesperson. It was not hidden in a carefully worded interview. It was live. It was real. It was an apology to Catherine, the future queen consort, and it was happening in front of millions. She started slowly, acknowledging that she had caused hurt. Her words hung in the air, almost fragile. She admitted that there were moments in the past where she had acted or spoken in ways that did not honor the bond she should have shared with Catherine. She mentioned misunderstandings, the weight of media scrutiny, the pressure of being compared, but then she shifted to something no one expected, responsibility. She said she was sorry, not for how others perceived her, not for how the media spun their stories, but for her own actions and the way she may have failed to support Catherine when she needed it most. This was the core of what shocked so many. Meghan, who had long been seen as defensive, was opening the door to humility. It was an olive branch wrapped in vulnerability. The cameras immediately cut to Catherine. Every eye in the room turned toward her. She did not shift uncomfortably. She did not break into tears. She remained composed, sitting upright, her hands clasped, her expression unreadable. And that silence spoke louder than any words could. People at home tweeted furiously, some insisting Catherine's stillness was grace under pressure, others suggesting it was coldness. But the true explosion came when William leaned forward, his jaw tight, and delivered the words that shattered the fragile hope building in that room. He said plainly that apologies delivered on live television did not erase years of pain inflicted behind closed doors. He said words could not undo the damage done to his wife. His tone was not theatrical. It was stern, protective, and final. The rejection was swift and public, and it echoed like a door slamming shut. That single exchange became known as the apology heard around the world. Within seconds, clips of Meghan's trembling words and William's sharp rejection flooded social media. On TikTok, edits paired her voice with emotional music, portraying her as a humbled woman seeking peace. On Twitter, users debated whether she was sincere or merely acting for the cameras. In the press, outlets scrambled to spin their takes. American media praised her courage, painting her as a woman who dared to step into humility. British tabloids, on the other hand, tore her apart, calling the apology calculated and desperate. The divide between public sympathy and skepticism was vast, and for once, Catherine remained the unspoken center of it all, her silence fueling speculation about what she really felt. But what made this moment so unforgettable was not only the drama of Meghan's words or William's rejection. It was the symbolism of it all. Here was a duchess who had walked away from the monarchy, stood before the world accusing it of cruelty and neglect, and now, in front of the very people she had once criticized, admitted her faults. The contrast was staggering. For Catherine, it was vindication without lifting a finger. For William, it was an opportunity to stand visibly by his wife's side, cementing his role as protector and future king. For Harry, sitting only a few feet away, it was agony written across his face as he watched his wife risk everything for a moment that was instantly crushed. The setting itself amplified the drama. The event had been intended as a charitable gathering, a celebration of causes close to the royal family's heart. The speeches were meant to be uplifting, showcasing unity and service. But Meghan's sudden choice to turn her address into a public apology derailed all expectations. Some applauded her bravery, saying it took guts to admit wrongdoing in such a forum. Others condemned her timing, arguing that she had hijacked the event to shift the narrative toward herself. That debate became the heartbeat of the following days. Was Meghan's apology about Catherine, or was it about Meghan's need for redemption? Consider the weight of Catherine's silence. For years, she had endured speculation, insults, comparisons, and allegations, never speaking directly to the press about her private feelings. In many ways, her silence had been her strength. And here, in this moment of live apology, she chose once again to remain silent. Some saw that as dignity, others as dismissal. Yet what everyone agreed on was that Catherine's composure elevated her above the chaos. If Meghan's apology was a performance of vulnerability, Catherine's stillness was a performance of restraint. Together, they created a tableau of two women embodying opposing forms of strength. The rejection by William added a final note that turned this into a spectacle of Shakespearean proportions. His words were not elaborate. He did not lash out in anger or raise his voice. But the firmness with which he refused Meghan's apology left no room for interpretation. It was a declaration that forgiveness could not be demanded on stage, that private wounds required private healing, and that the dignity of his wife was not to be cheapened by theatrics. His response placed him squarely in the role of defender, a husband prioritizing his wife's peace over public expectation. For many, this was the defining moment of the night, not Meghan's apology, but William's rejection. The ripple effect was immediate. Within hours, international outlets had dubbed it the confrontation of the year. Pundits speculated endlessly about the motives. Was Meghan pushed by Harry to issue the apology in a last attempt to mend family ties? Was it an act of desperation following waning public support and lost deals in America? Or was it truly the act of a woman who had carried guilt for years and finally summoned the courage to speak? These questions filled headlines, but the undeniable fact was that everyone was talking. From Buckingham Palace to living rooms in Los Angeles, the scene dominated conversation. What made the apology heard around the world so compelling was its layers. On the surface, it was a woman saying sorry to another. Beneath, it was a clash of power, reputation, and dignity. It was about Catherine, the silent queen-in-waiting, receiving acknowledgement without uttering a word. It was about Meghan, the outspoken duchess, risking her pride in front of millions. It was about William, the future king, drawing an unbreakable line in the sand. And hovering over it all was Harry, the man whose choices had bound these lives together in ways he could never have imagined. For viewers, it was impossible not to project personal emotions onto the scene. Some saw in Meghan's apology their own struggles to be forgiven by family members who had cut them off. Others saw in William's rejection their own decisions to protect loved ones from repeated hurt. The universality of apology and rejection made the moment resonate far beyond royal watchers. This wasn't just about crowns and castles. It was about human beings caught in the most public of family feuds, forced to live out their reconciliation, or lack thereof. Before the eyes of millions. By the time the applause returned, hesitant and uneven, the damage was already done. The apology had been offered. The rejection had been delivered. The silence had been preserved. And as the event moved on, the world knew it had just witnessed something historic. Not in the sense of treaties signed or wars ended, but in the rawness of human vulnerability exposed within the gilded walls of monarchy. It was the apology heard around the world, and it left behind echoes that would not fade quickly. Then the cameras captured Meghan Markle's live apology and William's immediate rejection of it. The world was shaken. But to truly understand why that moment mattered so deeply, one must return to the beginning. The years when Meghan first entered the royal fold and the public dreamed of a sisterly bond between her and Catherine. The contrast between what could have been and what actually unfolded is the heart of this fractured story. Chapter 2 is about tracing those years of unspoken tension, the subtle and not-so-subtle incidents that shaped their relationship, and the slow erosion of what might have been one of the most powerful alliances in modern royal history. At the start, the fairy tale looked intact. When Meghan and Harry announced their engagement in 2017, the world's fascination with the royal family reignited. Catherine and William, already established as the reliable, elegant face of the monarchy, were expected to welcome Meghan with open arms. Catherine herself had once been an outsider, navigating the rigid rules of royal life. The public assumed she would be a natural mentor, a sister figure who could guide Meghan through the labyrinth of tradition, duty, and expectation. For a brief moment, the narrative seemed poised for a new Fab Four: William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan, working together in harmony to modernize the monarchy. It was a vision of unity and fresh energy. But cracks began to form almost immediately. The first signs of tension were subtle, whispered about in gossip columns. Reports surfaced of Meghan's strong-willed personality clashing with palace staff. She was described as direct, demanding, and ambitious, qualities that in Hollywood were celebrated, but in the rigid framework of royalty were seen as disruptive. Catherine, by contrast, had spent nearly a decade quietly molding herself into the role of royal wife and mother. She avoided controversy, never raised her voice, and kept her circle tight. Where Meghan charged forward with American confidence, Catherine embodied restraint. The differences were stark, and instead of complementing each other, they seemed to amplify insecurities on both sides. The infamous bridesmaid dress incident during Meghan's 2018 wedding preparations marked the first public crack in their relationship. The story, leaked to tabloids, suggested that Catherine had been left in tears following a disagreement over Princess Charlotte's dress. For months, the media narrative was simple. Meghan had upset Catherine, the beloved duchess who rarely put a foot wrong. It was the kind of story that stuck, reinforcing the archetype of Catherine as fragile and dignified, and Meghan as brash and inconsiderate. Meghan later disputed the claim in her Oprah interview, insisting it was she who had cried, not Catherine, and that Catherine had later brought her flowers to apologize. Regardless of who told the truth, the damage was irreversible. A single private argument had been magnified into a symbol of their incompatibility, fueling years of speculation about their F. Beyond that incident, differences in lifestyle and values created additional distance. Catherine was rooted in tradition, finding stability in routine and consistency. Meghan, fresh from the entertainment industry, thrived on activism, expression, and independence. Catherine embraced her role as a future queen consort, cautious and deliberate. Meghan bristled against the constraints, questioning protocols, and pushing for change. These two women were cast by the media as opposites in every way, and soon they were being compared relentlessly. What they wore, how they held their children, how they smiled, even how they walked. It was not simply unfair, it was destructive. No relationship could withstand that level of constant comparison. Then came the added strain of Harry and William's own diverging paths. Harry felt fiercely protective of Meghan, believing the press treated her more harshly than anyone else in the family. William, on the other hand, was focused on preserving the dignity and reputation of the monarchy, and may have privately questioned Meghan's fit within the institution. Catherine, loyal to her husband and to the crown, naturally aligned with William's perspective. Meghan, feeling isolated, leaned on Harry. What could have been a triangle of support between the three women instead became a wedge that split the brothers apart. Catherine and Meghan never had the chance to form an authentic sisterly bond because their husbands' rift deepened around them. By the time Meghan and Harry decided to step back from royal duties in 2020, the relationship between Catherine and Meghan had gone from strained to nearly non-existent. Public appearances told the story. At events, the two women avoided eye contact, their smiles tight and formal. Meghan accused the institution of leaving her unprotected, while Catherine remained silent, the picture of composure. For Meghan, that silence likely felt like complicity. For Catherine, it was survival. The result was an ever-widening chasm between them, reinforced by every headline, every leaked rumor, every cold glance caught on camera. What makes their fractured sisterhood so haunting is the lost potential. Imagine the strength they could have wielded together. Catherine, with her steady hand on the pulse of tradition, and Meghan, with her global star power and modern outlook. Together, they could have been a dynamic force, bridging the old and the new, softening the monarchy's image, and carrying forward Diana's legacy in complementary ways. Instead, their differences were weaponized by the press, exploited by palace insiders, and entrenched by personal grievances. Instead of allies, they became symbols. Catherine the untouchable standard, Meghan the disruptor. And so, by the time Meghan stood on stage to apologize, years of mistrust and resentment weighed on every word. Her acknowledgement of past wrongs was not just about one incident or one argument. It was about years of accumulated pain. It was about every headline that painted Catherine as a saint and Meghan as a villain. It was about every moment Meghan felt unsupported, every time Catherine chose silence, every wound left to fester rather than heal. The apology was a recognition of all of that, and perhaps an attempt to rewrite their story before it was too late. But William's rejection proved how deep those wounds ran. For him, the history mattered too much. The fractured sisterhood could not be mended with a single gesture, no matter how public or emotional. What this chapter reveals is that the apology was not born in isolation. It was the culmination of years of rivalry, misunderstanding, and unspoken pain. Catherine and Meghan were never simply sisters-in-law. They were foils to each other, mirrors reflecting qualities the other lacked, trapped in a system that thrived on their differences. And when Meghan finally chose to say sorry, it was not just an apology to Catherine. It was a confession to the world that the dream of unity had failed, and that she bore some of the blame. But the years of fracture had left scars too deep for William, or perhaps even Catherine, to overlook. From the very beginning, Catherine and Meghan represented two contrasting visions of what it meant to be a royal woman in the 21st century. The differences between them were not only in personality but in approach, in philosophy, and in how each understood the role she had been thrust into. The media, the palace, and the public magnified those differences, turning them into the very core of their identities. Where Catherine embodied a kind of silent dignity, Meghan insisted on being outspoken. Where Catherine's power came from restraint, Meghan's came from expression. Their divergence created both fascination and friction, and in the end, it shaped the moment of apology and rejection in ways few could have predicted. Catherine, born into a middle-class family in Berkshire, had spent nearly a decade in Prince William's orbit before marrying him. By the time she became Duchess of Cambridge, she had already learned the art of survival in the palace. She understood that silence was not weakness but strategy. Every time she chose not to respond to rumors, every time she endured criticism without flinching, she reinforced the very image the monarchy needed: stability. Catherine's role was to be unshakable, composed, and immune to scandal. And she played it with precision. She rarely gave interviews, never deviated from the script of duty, and avoided personal commentary at all costs. Her dignity was her armor, and she wore it with ease. Meghan, by contrast, arrived on the royal stage as a fully formed public figure. She was an actress, an activist, and a woman who had already cultivated her voice long before meeting Prince Harry. She was used to platforms, to speaking out, to shaping narratives in her own terms. Where Catherine had spent years learning to fade into the monarchy, Meghan had thrived in the spotlight. When she encountered the palace's culture of silence, she resisted it. To Meghan, silence equaled complicity. To Catherine, silence equaled strength. This fundamental difference in outlook set the stage for everything that would follow. When Meghan gave the Oprah interview, the contrast became impossible to ignore. She spoke candidly about her mental health struggles, about the lack of support she felt, about the conversations behind palace walls. She spoke names, recounted incidents, and opened the doors to a world the royals had always kept hidden. To her supporters, it was bravery, an act of truth-telling that shook an archaic system. To her critics, it was betrayal, an airing of private grievances that undermined the dignity of the monarchy. Catherine, meanwhile, never uttered a word. She appeared at public events, smiling as always, her silence a shield against both sympathy and attack. The two women were painted as opposites, one voiceless, one too loud, one dignified, one disruptive. But the truth was more complicated. Catherine's silent dignity was not passive. It was active, chosen, and deliberate. It was the product of years of training, of knowing that the future of the crown depended on her consistency. It was also protection of her children, her marriage, and her own mental well-being. Meghan's rebellion was equally deliberate. She was unwilling to surrender her individuality for an institution. She believed her voice mattered, and that using it could force change. Both approaches were rooted in strength, but they were incompatible when placed side by side. Their differences became fuel for media narratives that pitted them against each other in a contest neither had signed up for, but both were forced to endure. The clash between dignity and rebellion was evident in every public moment. At official events, Catherine would glide through crowds with an almost studied calm, every gesture measured. Meghan, on the other hand, engaged emotionally, breaking protocols to hug fans, to speak openly, to connect in ways that broke the palace mold. For admirers, Meghan was refreshing. For traditionalists, she was destabilizing. Catherine never corrected Meghan, never clashed with her in public, but the contrast was glaring. The palace didn't need words to create a narrative. The women's differences spoke for themselves. These opposing philosophies also explain why Meghan's apology carried such weight, and why William's rejection of it was so sharp. For Meghan, the act of apologizing publicly was an extension of her belief in expression. She believed that by speaking openly, by showing vulnerability, she could bridge divides. But for Catherine and William, the very act of making such an apology live on stage was proof that Meghan still didn't understand the monarchy's code. They believed such matters, if they were to be addressed at all, should remain private. In Catherine's silent world, dignity came from restraint. In Meghan's outspoken world, dignity came from honesty. The apology itself was not just a statement of remorse. It was a collision of two worldviews. What complicates the narrative further is how the public projected themselves onto these two women. Catherine's silence inspired admiration in those who valued tradition, stoicism, and grace under fire. Meghan's outspokenness inspired admiration in those who valued transparency, authenticity, and courage. Both were turned into symbols, and the women behind them became obscured. Catherine was expected to be endlessly gracious, Meghan endlessly bold. There was no room for nuance. Their humanity was lost beneath the weight of expectation. And so, when Meghan stood up to apologize, she was judged not only as Meghan the woman, but as Meghan the rebel duchess. Catherine's silence in response was judged not only as Catherine's choice, but as Catherine the stoic queen-in-waiting. The deeper tragedy is that Catherine's dignity and Meghan's rebellion could have been complementary rather than oppositional. Together, they might have offered the monarchy a dual image, one of tradition and one of progress, one of composure and one of change. Instead, their differences were sharpened into weapons by the media and by circumstance. By the time Meghan's apology came, it was not just about Catherine and Meghan. It was about what each represented. And William's rejection of that apology was as much a rejection of Meghan's philosophy as it was of her words. He chose silence over expression, dignity over vulnerability, and in doing so, he reinforced the very divide that had defined these women from the start. As millions watched the apology unfold, they weren't only witnessing personal tension, they were witnessing the clash of two archetypes that had defined royal women for centuries. Catherine stood in the tradition of queens and consorts who endured, who sacrificed their voices for the crown. Meghan represented the modern woman who demanded to be heard, even at the cost of tradition. The moment was not just about the past wounds between them, but about the future of the monarchy itself. Could it adapt to a world that values openness, or would it double down on its legacy of silence? The apology and its rejection answered that question, at least for now. Silence triumphed, and rebellion was pushed back into the shadows. In the end, Catherine's silent dignity and Meghan's outspoken rebellion will forever frame their relationship. They were never simply two women navigating marriage into the royal family. They were two symbols of competing values in a world watching every move. Their contrast made Meghan's live apology inevitable and William's rejection unavoidable. And as the dust settled, what lingered was not only the pain between two women, but the realization that their opposing approaches had locked them in a struggle that neither could escape, a struggle that shaped one of the most unforgettable moments in modern royal history. From the earliest days of his relationship with Meghan Markle, Prince Harry made one thing clear to the world. He would do whatever it took to protect her. He had grown up in the glare of the spotlight, watching how the press had hounded his mother, Princess Diana, to her tragic end. That trauma shaped him, hardened him, and left him fiercely determined that history would not repeat itself. When Meghan entered his life, she wasn't just a new partner. She became the person he vowed to shield from the very forces that had haunted him for decades. But this protective instinct, noble as it may have seemed, soon created a wedge between him and the family he had once been so close to, particularly his brother William and, by extension, Catherine. Harry's role in the rift between Meghan and Catherine cannot be understated, for he was not simply a bystander, but an active participant, torn between love and loyalty, duty and defiance. Harry and William had always been bound together not just by blood, but by the shared experience of losing their mother at such a young age. For years, they were inseparable, often described as each other's closest confidants. When Catherine married William, she too became part of that bond, acting as a steady, almost sisterly presence in Harry's life. They laughed together at events, shared private jokes, and appeared genuinely close. Catherine reportedly saw herself as something of an anchor for Harry, someone who offered stability when he was adrift. But Meghan's arrival altered that balance forever. Where Catherine had once been the calming influence in Harry's life, Meghan became his center of gravity, and his priorities shifted entirely. At first, William was supportive of Harry's relationship with Meghan, but reports suggest that he urged his younger brother to take his time before rushing into marriage. This advice, though arguably sensible, was received by Harry as criticism. He interpreted it as a lack of support for Meghan, as hesitation that could only mean doubt. From that point onward, suspicion began to creep into his perception of William and Catherine. Instead of viewing them as allies, Harry began to see them as part of an establishment that might never fully accept Meghan. Catherine, always cautious and deliberate, maintained her distance, careful not to interfere. But in Harry's mind, that very silence became part of the problem. He saw it not as neutrality, but as indifference. As tensions grew, Harry often stepped in to defend Meghan, even when it meant clashing with his own family. The infamous incident involving the bridesmaid dresses became a point of deep contention. Harry reportedly sided with Meghan in the aftermath, believing Catherine's emotional response had been exaggerated and unfairly weaponized by the press. He resented that Catherine's tears were painted sympathetically while Meghan was cast as a villain. For Harry, this wasn't just about dresses. It was about the broader pattern of how Meghan was treated compared to Catherine. His frustration with the double standards became a recurring theme, one that hardened his stance against William and widened the gap between the couples. The Oprah interview in 2021 further demonstrated Harry's loyalty to Meghan and his willingness to prioritize her voice over the royal code of silence. Sitting beside her, he confirmed and reinforced her claims, including allegations of racist comments and lack of support from the institution. His participation made clear that he wasn't just passively supporting her, he was actively taking her side against his own family. That decision, while perhaps validating to Meghan, was devastating to his bond with William and Catherine. For Catherine in particular, it meant that her name and reputation were caught in the crossfire of an interview broadcast around the globe, with no means to defend herself. For William, it was a betrayal not just of brotherly trust, but of the monarchy itself. When Meghan issued her live apology years later, it was almost certain that Harry had played a role in encouraging her to do so. He had long been aware of how much the public feud with Catherine damaged Meghan's image, and perhaps he saw the apology as a chance to rebuild bridges. But the sight of him at the event told another story. As Meghan spoke, his face betrayed anxiety, even desperation. He looked like a man caught between two impossible choices: stand by his wife and risk further alienating his brother, or distance himself from her in order to mend fences with his family. In the end, he remained by Meghan's side, but the pain was clear. He had chosen his loyalty to her once again, knowing full well the cost. William's rejection of Meghan's apology was, in many ways, also a rejection of Harry. It was a statement that the trust between brothers had been broken too many times to be repaired by a single gesture. Harry's role in amplifying Meghan's voice, in supporting her public grievances, and in distancing himself from his family had led to this breaking point. The rejection wasn't just about Meghan's words. It was about years of choices Harry had made, each one widening the gap until reconciliation seemed impossible. The look on Harry's face in that moment, caught by countless cameras, was one of devastation. He had stood by Meghan as she apologized, perhaps hoping William would soften. Instead, he watched as his brother drew a final line in the sand. It is worth considering whether Harry underestimated the depth of the hurt Meghan had caused Catherine. His protective instinct may have blinded him to the ways in which Catherine had been quietly wounded over the years. He had focused so much on defending Meghan that he had little space to acknowledge Catherine's perspective. And William, fiercely loyal to his wife, saw in Harry's choices not only a betrayal but a failure to honor the woman who had stood by him through years of public scrutiny. This triangle of loyalty, Harry to Meghan, William to Catherine, was the core of the rift. No amount of public apologies could easily untangle it. Harry's role in the rift was not malicious, but it was pivotal. His determination to shield Meghan from harm became the very reason harm multiplied within his family. His willingness to air grievances publicly set him apart from the brother who prized discretion above all else. His choice to side with Meghan in every battle solidified the perception that he had abandoned his family for her. And yet, one cannot ignore the sincerity of his motives. He truly believed he was protecting his wife from the same fate as his mother. The tragedy is that in saving one family, he lost another. By the time Meghan's apology reached Catherine's ears, it was no longer just about two women. It was about a brotherhood broken, about a husband torn in two, about loyalty tested beyond its limits. Harry's role in the rift ensured that the apology, no matter how heartfelt, would never be enough on its own. William saw not only Meghan's past actions, but Harry's years of complicity. And when he rejected the apology, he was speaking not just to Meghan but to Harry as well. It was a rejection of everything that had driven them apart, and it left Harry in the very position he had feared most, a man who had given everything to protect his wife, and yet stood powerless as the chasm between his family grew wider than ever before. The moment William rose to speak, the atmosphere in the room changed. Up until then, Meghan's apology had cast a spell over the audience. The tremor in her voice, the visible effort to appear vulnerable, had drawn the attention of millions watching live. Some were moved, some were skeptical, but all were waiting for one thing: the response. And when William finally broke the silence, his words carried the weight not only of a husband defending his wife, but of a future king setting boundaries for the world to see. His unforgiving response did not come in a rush of emotion. It was deliberate, measured, and devastating in its clarity. William began by acknowledging the apology, but his acknowledgement was distant, almost clinical. He made it clear that while words could be spoken, they could not erase what had been lived through. He said Catherine had endured years of pain in silence, choosing dignity over retaliation, while the world dissected every rumor and allegation. He spoke of the toll that silence had taken, not just on Catherine but on their family as a whole. His voice did not waver, but his jaw was tight, his body language protective. He stood as a barrier between Catherine and the woman who had just apologized, signaling to everyone in that room that forgiveness would not be granted so easily. The power of William's rejection came from its public nature. The monarchy has always thrived on carefully crafted responses, often issued through press statements or intermediaries. Rarely do royals speak their feelings so openly, especially when those feelings are sharp. But William chose this moment to draw a line, and that decision stunned even seasoned royal observers. His rejection was not laced with insults or dramatics. Instead, it was cold, firm, and absolute. In essence, he told Meghan, and the millions watching, that Catherine's suffering could not be undone by a speech, that wounds inflicted behind closed doors could not be healed by words offered under the spotlight. And in doing so, he rejected not just the apology, but the very idea that reconciliation could happen on such terms. The audience in the room was frozen, caught between the tension of Meghan's visible hurt and William's unwavering refusal. Catherine remained composed, her expression unchanged, but her stillness seemed to reinforce William's stance. It was as though he was voicing the words she had chosen not to speak. For years, Catherine had endured being portrayed as either the victim of Meghan's actions or the silent foil to Meghan's outspoken nature. Now, William was reclaiming the narrative. He was telling the world that his wife's dignity would not be tarnished by performance, and that her silence did not mean weakness but strength. The message was unmistakable. Catherine did not need Meghan's apology to validate her pain, nor would William allow it to be used as a stage for redemption. Social media erupted almost instantly. Clips of William's response flooded the internet, often accompanied by dramatic captions. William stands firm. The future king defends his queen. No forgiveness. Some praised him as the ultimate protector, applauding his loyalty to Catherine and his refusal to bow to public pressure. Others criticized him for being harsh, arguing that a refusal to accept an apology only perpetuates bitterness. But even among critics, there was recognition that William's words carried authority. He wasn't just a husband in that moment. He was the embodiment of an institution that demands control, loyalty, and resilience. His unforgiving response was as much about protecting the monarchy's image as it was about shielding his wife. What made William's rejection so striking was that it shattered the narrative many viewers had hoped for. People had expected emotion, perhaps even tears. They wanted to see Meghan and Catherine embrace, to witness a fairy tale reconciliation that would heal the family and bring closure. William's firm stance destroyed that expectation. Instead of a happy ending, the audience was confronted with reality. The reality that not all apologies are accepted and not all wounds can be healed. William's words reminded the world that some betrayals leave scars too deep to fade, even when forgiveness is requested in front of millions. It is also important to understand the symbolism of William's role in this exchange. As the heir to the throne, His every word carries weight beyond personal emotion. By rejecting Meghan's apology so publicly, he was sending a message not just to her, but to everyone. That the monarchy would not be swayed by dramatic gestures, that loyalty to his wife and family would always outweigh optics, and that some boundaries cannot be crossed without permanent consequence. It was a lesson in power, both personal and institutional. William was showing the world that he would not allow Catherine to be humiliated again, not even in the guise of reconciliation. For Meghan, the rejection was a crushing blow. Her face revealed the sting of being dismissed so publicly. She had taken a risk, laying herself bare before the cameras, perhaps believing that humility would open a door to healing. Instead, the door was slammed shut. For Harry, the rejection was agony of another kind. He had watched his wife summon the courage to apologize, and he had surely hoped his brother might meet her halfway. Instead, he saw his brother side unequivocally with Catherine, reinforcing the wall that had grown between them. The rejection was not just aimed at Meghan. It was aimed at him too, a reminder that his choices had consequences and that the bond between the brothers was no longer what it once had been. In the days that followed, commentators and insiders dissected William's response from every angle. Some argued it was a calculated move to solidify his image as a strong, protective husband. Others suggested it revealed the depth of his personal anger, an anger that years of royal training could no longer conceal. A few even speculated that William had spoken out of necessity, knowing that Catherine's silence would otherwise be interpreted as weakness. Whatever the motive, the result was the same. The apology, instead of bringing closure, had deepened the divide. William's unforgiving stance ensured that the feud remained alive, more public and painful than ever. William's rejection was also deeply human. Beyond the titles and the palace walls, it was the response of a man who had watched his wife suffer, who had felt her pain, and who refused to let that pain be minimized by a speech. It was the kind of loyalty that resonates universally. Anyone who has ever stood by a loved one knows the instinct to protect them from further harm. In that moment, William was not just the Duke of Cambridge or the future king. He was a husband unwilling to compromise his wife's dignity for the sake of appearances. And that made his words powerful, unforgettable, and devastating all at once. In the end, William's unforgiving response turned the apology into something else entirely. It was no longer just Meghan's act of contrition. It became a reminder of the deep fractures within the royal family. His rejection did not close the chapter, but opened a new one defined by hardened lines, public declarations, and wounds that could not be smoothed over by performance. It was a moment that reminded the world that reconciliation is not guaranteed, that forgiveness is not automatic, and that sometimes, even within families, apologies fall on deaf ears. When Meghan's apology echoed through the room and William's rejection followed, all eyes turned to Catherine. For years, she had been the subject of countless headlines, painted alternately as the gracious Duchess, the silent sufferer, the elegant future queen, and the woman wronged by Meghan Markle. Yet she had never given the public so much as a sentence in her own defense. The intrigue surrounding her in that moment was not about what she might say, but about what she might reveal simply by being there. Catherine's quiet reaction became the most studied, dissected, and speculated over aspect of the entire episode. Her silence was louder than any speech could have been. Catherine sat with the composure she had perfected over nearly 2 decades in the royal spotlight. Her back straight, her hands folded gently, her expression serene but unreadable. The cameras lingered on her face, searching for cracks, a twitch of the lip, a flicker of the eyes, a tightening of the jaw. But there was nothing. She gave nothing away. It was this very absence of reaction that inflamed the fascination. Some observers called it dignity, a queenly refusal to engage in spectacle. Others called it coldness, suggesting she could have softened the moment with a nod, a smile, or even a few words of acknowledgement. But Catherine gave neither validation nor dismissal. She chose neutrality, and in doing so, she wielded a kind of control that few others could match. To understand Catherine's choice, one must consider the role she has built for herself within the royal family. From the beginning, she has embodied the institution's preference for discretion. Unlike Meghan, Catherine has never made herself the story. She has never sat for an interview that laid bare her personal grievances. She has never spoken publicly about conflicts or struggles, even though she has surely endured many. Her strength lies in her ability to endure without commentary. That strategy was on display here. By offering no visible response to Meghan's apology, she avoided becoming entangled in a narrative of reconciliation or rejection. She allowed William's words to stand as the shield, while she remained untouchable, unassailable. But silence is never empty. It always carries meaning. In Catherine's case, her quiet reaction spoke of both grace and calculation. Grace, because she refused to humiliate Meghan further. She could have visibly turned away. She could have shaken her head. She could have allowed herself a smirk that the cameras would have devoured. But she did none of that. Her stillness preserved Meghan from additional embarrassment. Calculation, because by withholding her own words, she denied Meghan the validation of closure. An apology is only as powerful as the forgiveness it receives, and Catherine gave none. In that vacuum, speculation flourished. Was she secretly moved? Was she still wounded? Or had she long ago made peace with the fact that forgiveness would never come? Her silence kept the world guessing. Catherine's quiet reaction also underscored her evolution as a royal figure. In the early years of her marriage, critics called her cautious to the point of blandness, accusing her of being too silent, too careful, too unwilling to stand out. But over time, what once seemed like timidity became her greatest asset. She became the steady hand in a family known for turmoil. She endured scandals, feuds, and relentless comparison without faltering. Her silence became her power, her ability to rise above drama by refusing to dignify it with response. In the moment of Meghan's apology, this trait was crystallized. While the world expected emotion, Catherine gave composure. While Meghan poured out vulnerability, Catherine exuded strength. The contrast was almost theatrical. For Meghan, Catherine's silence may have been more painful than William's rejection. William's words were sharp but expected. He had always been fiercely protective of his wife. Catherine's refusal to respond, however, left Meghan suspended in uncertainty. Did Catherine accept her apology privately, even if she would not show it publicly? Did she reject it entirely? Did she feel pity, or did she feel triumph? Meghan could not know, and that ambiguity was itself a form of quiet dominance. In Catherine's silence, Meghan's words seemed to evaporate into the air, unanswered and unresolved. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Public opinion on Catherine's reaction was split. Admirers praised her restraint, calling her the epitome of class for not stooping to spectacle. They argued that her silence demonstrated emotional intelligence, a refusal to escalate an already charged moment. Critics, however, accused her of cruelty through omission. They suggested she could have extended a hand, literally or figuratively, to ease the tension. They argued that forgiveness, even symbolic, would have shown Catherine as magnanimous and unthreatened. But Catherine is not a woman who acts on public demand. Her every move is measured against the long game: the crown, the monarchy, the institution. Forgiveness on stage might have softened her image momentarily, but it could also have weakened the boundaries she and William had fought to preserve. She chose strength over sentiment, and in her world, that was survival. It is also worth noting the impact of Catherine's quiet reaction on her relationship with the public. In the aftermath, polls showed a surge of sympathy for her. The majority saw her as the wronged party, the dignified woman who had endured insult and emerged stronger. Meghan's apology, meant to humanize her, instead reminded the world of Catherine's composure under years of strain. The silence became another chapter in the narrative of Catherine as the embodiment of royal grace. She didn't need to speak. Her restraint spoke volumes. And in a monarchy that has long equated silence with strength, Catherine reinforced her role as the figure who could be trusted never to falter, never to indulge in drama, never to tarnish the crown. Behind the stillness, however, one cannot help but wonder what Catherine truly felt. Was she weary of being painted as the saint in this story, the woman who always bore pain without complaint? Did she long to tell her side, to finally express the toll of years of rivalry and gossip? Or had she so fully embraced the role of silent dignity that she no longer felt the need? Only Catherine herself could answer those questions, and she never would. That was the essence of her power, mystery. Meghan gave everything away: her pain, her regret, her vulnerability. Catherine kept everything within, leaving the world to project onto her whatever narrative suited their beliefs. The two approaches could not have been more different, and in that difference lay the reason reconciliation seemed so impossible. Catherine's quiet reaction was the final brushstroke on a scene that had already captivated millions. Meghan apologized, William rejected, and Catherine remained serene. Together, the three of them created an image that told the entire story of their fractured relationships. Meghan, emotional and expressive; William, protective and unforgiving; Catherine, silent and composed. It was a tableau of modern royalty, one that captured the essence of their conflicts and the roles they had each come to play. For those watching, it was unforgettable, not because of what was said, but because of what was withheld. In the end, Catherine's quiet reaction ensured that the story would remain unresolved. Forgiveness was neither granted nor denied. Closure was withheld, and in that space of ambiguity, Catherine retained the upper hand. She left Meghan exposed, William fortified, and the public enthralled. Her silence was not weakness. It was strategy, it was strength, and it was the final reminder that in the monarchy, sometimes saying nothing means everything. When Meghan Markle's live apology spilled across television screens and William's rejection struck like a hammer blow, the audience reaction was immediate and visceral. Within seconds, the internet became a battlefield. Millions of people across the world, royal watchers, casual viewers, critics, and supporters, took sides in a debate that revealed not just opinions about Meghan and Catherine, but deeper truths about loyalty, forgiveness, and the fractured image of the monarchy itself. Chapter 7, Public Reactions, A Kingdom Divided, captures the frenzy of voices, the polarized opinions, and the cultural clash that turned one family moment into a global referendum on what it means to forgive and what it means to stand firm. Social media lit up first. On Twitter, hashtags trended within minutes. Hashtag Stand with Catherine, hashtag Justice for Meghan, hashtag William Protects Kate, hashtag Meghan Apology. Each told its own story. Each carried millions of comments, memes, and emotional outbursts. Those sympathetic to Meghan argued that it took courage to apologize on such a public stage. They replayed her trembling voice, pointing out how rare it is for someone in her position to admit mistakes in front of millions. Some framed her apology as the ultimate act of humility, a gesture that deserved recognition even if forgiveness was not forthcoming. But on the other side, William's rejection was hailed as heroic. Countless posts described him as the husband every woman wanted, unwavering in his defense, unwilling to let anyone downplay his wife's pain. Catherine, meanwhile, was elevated to near mythical status, her silence seen as saintly composure. YouTube commentators and podcasters rushed to upload their takes, some framing Meghan as a misunderstood woman trying desperately to repair a broken bond, others portraying her as a manipulator seeking sympathy at Catherine's expense. Clips of the apology racked up millions of views, often edited with dramatic music, slow-motion zooms, and flashing headlines. In America, many viewers leaned toward empathy for Meghan, interpreting William's rejection as cold, harsh, and unnecessary. In Britain, however, William's stance was celebrated as the mark of a man who would not allow the monarchy to be turned into a stage for personal drama. The cultural divide was stark. Where Americans admired confession, Britons admired composure. Where Americans valued emotional transparency, Britons valued stoicism. The moment became a mirror, reflecting back the differences between two cultures still fascinated with each other but divided in what they admired. The tabloids seized on the split reactions. British front pages were filled with bold headlines declaring William's strength, Catherine's dignity, and Meghan's humiliation. Editorials praised the future king for refusing to be swayed by sentiment. One newspaper called it the moment William cemented his role as the unwavering protector of the monarchy. American outlets, by contrast, leaned heavily into Meghan's side of the story. Morning talk shows discussed how brave she had been to apologize, how vulnerable she looked as William dismissed her, how unfair it seemed that Catherine did not even nod in acknowledgement. The differing coverage only deepened the division, making reconciliation appear even more impossible. But it wasn't only the media who reacted. It was ordinary people from all walks of life who projected their own experiences onto the scene. For some, Meghan's apology stirred memories of their own attempts to repair family relationships, only to be met with rejection. They expressed sympathy, writing that no one deserves to be turned away when they seek forgiveness. For others, William's refusal resonated deeply. They recalled times when they had stood by loved ones, refusing to forgive those who had inflicted harm. They praised him as a man who understood that apologies without accountability mean little. Catherine's silence, too, was interpreted in personal terms. Some saw in her stillness the kind of strength they wished they could emulate. Others saw pain, reading her composure as a mask over wounds that still had not healed. The debate spilled into workplaces, cafes, living rooms. Families argued over whether Meghan had been sincere, whether William had been right, whether Catherine should have done more. The monarchy, long seen as distant and untouchable, had suddenly provided a scene that felt achingly human. It wasn't just about crowns and palaces anymore. It was about family conflict, loyalty, and the universal struggle of when to forgive. And because it was so human, it divided people fiercely. Everyone seemed to see their own reflection in the story, which is why it became impossible to ignore. Experts weighed in as well, offering analyses that only fueled the fire. Psychologists argued on news panels that Meghan's apology was a classic example of vulnerability, and that William's rejection showed the depth of the hurt still lingering. Media analysts pointed out that Meghan's choice to apologize live, in front of cameras, risked being seen as performance rather than sincerity. Royal biographers reminded audiences of the years of tension that had led to this point, suggesting that no apology could wipe away the damage. Some even suggested that William's rejection was strategic, that by standing firm, he sent a signal to the press, the public, and even palace insiders that Catherine would never again be made to carry blame silently. The interpretations multiplied, and each one added a new layer to the divide. As the days wore on, public reaction crystallized into camps. Meghan's supporters rallied around her, framing her as a woman repeatedly silenced and vilified, finally daring to humble herself. The debate became toxic, spilling into online harassment, endless comment wars, and long essays on blogs and social media platforms. The apology, meant to heal, had instead reignited old wounds, not just within the family, but within the public who had followed their every step for years. The kingdom, metaphorically speaking, was divided. Some admired Meghan's courage to speak, others admired William's courage to refuse, and nearly all admired Catherine's ability to remain serene. It was a rare moment when all three figures were simultaneously elevated and criticized, their every gesture scrutinized, their every silence interpreted. What united everyone, regardless of side, was the recognition that the monarchy had never before been so publicly raw. This was not the carefully choreographed world of balcony appearances and scripted speeches. This was unscripted conflict, aired before millions, and it had left the world more divided than ever. And yet, beneath the division, there was a strange sense of connection. People cared. They debated. They argued. They shared, because the story mattered to them. It wasn't just about Meghan, Catherine, or William. It was about themselves, their own experiences of apology and rejection, their own feelings about dignity and rebellion. The monarchy, for one night, had stopped being a distant institution and had become a mirror of humanity's messiest truths. A kingdom divided, yes, but also a kingdom deeply engaged. The morning after Meghan Markle's live apology and Prince William's stinging rejection, the headlines told two very different stories depending on which side of the Atlantic one woke up on. In Britain, the tabloids thundered with triumph. Meghan had been humbled, William had stood tall, Catherine had emerged vindicated. Across the ocean, American outlets focused on Meghan's trembling voice, her willingness to admit fault, and the coldness of William's refusal to accept her apology. This divergence was not just about media bias. It was about two cultures interpreting the same moment through different lenses. And the media storm that followed turned what could have been a moment of private healing into one of the most dissected public controversies in recent royal history. British tabloids wasted no time sharpening their knives. Front pages screamed with words like rejection, humiliation, and unforgiven. Photos of Meghan, eyes glistening and lips pressed tight, were splashed across covers, often juxtaposed with images of Catherine looking serene, untouched, queenly. The narrative was clear. Meghan had tried to claw back respect, and William had denied her the satisfaction. One paper described the moment as a masterclass in loyalty, praising William for defending his wife against years of slander. Another called Meghan's apology performance art, suggesting it was orchestrated to garner sympathy for her waning influence in America. Commentators filled column inches with speculation, but the tone was overwhelmingly skeptical of Meghan's sincerity and celebratory of Catherine's composure. Television pundits in Britain echoed this sentiment. Morning shows replayed William's words on loop, often pausing to analyze his body language. Guests praised him for refusing to let his wife's pain be brushed aside. Others speculated that Catherine's silence had been strategic, preserving her dignity while William did the talking. Meghan's apology, however, was scrutinized to the point of ridicule. Her pauses, her gestures, her trembling voice, everything was picked apart as though it were evidence of calculation. For the British press, the story was not about reconciliation but about reaffirmation. Catherine's role as the untouchable future queen and William's as her loyal defender. In America, the coverage was starkly different. The morning shows there focused almost entirely on Meghan's bravery. Clips of her apology were shown with soft music, commentators remarking on how difficult it must have been for her to humble herself in such a public way. William's rejection was criticized as harsh, even cruel, with some presenters suggesting it reinforced the stereotype of the royal family as cold and unforgiving. Catherine's silence was interpreted less as dignity and more as detachment. One popular talk show host even went so far as to say that Meghan had shown more humanity in 2 minutes than Catherine had in 20 years. The framing was sympathetic to Meghan, painting her as a woman willing to take responsibility while her in-laws remained frozen in formality. American celebrity magazines followed the same line. Glossy spreads appeared online within hours, hailing Meghan as courageous, vulnerable, and misunderstood. Writers framed the apology as a step toward healing, lamenting that William's refusal had closed the door. Photos of Meghan were chosen carefully, close-ups of her moist eyes, her downturned face, her hands clasped tightly together. She was portrayed as the heroine of the moment, standing alone against an unyielding institution. The divide in media portrayal could not have been clearer. In Britain, Meghan was desperate. In America, she was brave. The contrast extended into the commentary of experts. British royal correspondents argued that Meghan's apology was far too little, far too late, and that it had been made in the wrong setting. They pointed out that apologies in the monarchy are not supposed to be spectacles, and by making hers live, Meghan had turned a private matter into a performance. American commentators countered that very point, saying her choice to go public was what made it meaningful. In their view, apologizing privately might have been easier. Apologizing on stage, with the world watching, required true courage. The debate reflected the cultural values of each country. Britain admiring restraint and privacy, America admiring openness and emotional honesty. Social media amplified these opposing narratives. British users circulated tabloid headlines, praising William's loyalty and mocking Meghan's attempt at redemption.